Welcome back to the Berg podcast. Thanks for joining today. With me today is Dan.
Hey, everybody.
And Ford.
Hey, how's it going?
And we're talking a little bit about spring. Spring has sprung. Spring is springing. When's the official first day of spring? Is it?
It's like March 21st or something like that.
It's right around the corner. It's coming in quick. So, and we've done this conversation before in the past, but a little bit about how do we make the transition? How do we get out of winter and into our normal, so to speak, season here? And what's the importance of that?
Well, and I think that, hey, guess what? Every spring we do this podcast is probably going to be one about it because it is so important to hit the ground running, to, use whatever code you want to do. But we were talking earlier about it, like the racetrack. Like if you get off the line cleanly or running, you get off the line cleanly, everything goes smoother. You falter off the starting line and you might spend the entire rest of the time just trying to catch up to it.
Yeah, you can't forget what happens over the winter, right? Like, the way the year works. Like, winter's winter. And, this year we didn't really have a winter per se. It got wet. It got nasty. It wasn't nice, but it wasn't snowing and freezing. There wasn't frost. So, but you put that behind you in this industry, and you just, in the Northeast, you put it behind you and you just say, okay, now it's time to go, and we line up, and we were using the race analogy that you can't stumble out of the gate. And I really believe that when you come into March, we need to have everything go right on the jobs we're on. We're working with dates that trigger certain things based on growing seasons and other things. We have to be mindful of those dates, like a hurdle in a race, and you got to get to that hurdle at the right spot so that you can continue to run. If we have to break stride or we miss a deadline, it creates problems the rest of the way, and it trips you up on the next job. Because that's what a lot of times we don't think about. Like, what's going on? What job is breaking right now? What are we starting? And a lot of times, it's not about the job that we're just starting. There's a couple jobs that we did the work we could do over the winter. We did demo work, we did other work, and we're ready to go. We're standing at the starting line. We have some utility work in. We're going to go. And it's really important that this goes smoothly for the whole year, for the whole calendar year, because by June, July, you want to be closing so you can get to August. You know what I mean? And then by August, that lets you close by December. Like, in other words, these jobs tend to be certain lengths, 6 months, 18 months, 3 months. They're all different. But part of what the PMs do is they're trying to piece all these together like a puzzle and say, like, okay, how do we end up with the least amount of gaps where we can just go from one to the other
right,
with just a little space in between to give us room as a mesh point where we can sort of like a relay hand off.
Yeah.
But what happens is if you're not in the right spot, now we can't make the handoff. Okay, so now we're going to move a different supervisor to go do that job. And we're going to move another supervisor to do this job. And then they're both going to get done. And now we might not have the right crew. And it might not be there's nothing about what they can do. It's about that one guy lives in one place, and it'd be best if we got him that job, his crew has to move the least.
Yeah.
Like, it's not always the most obvious thing that you would think of why we want to put a person somewhere. Sometimes they're the best person for that job based on experience, but sometimes it's where the crew's coming from. Sometimes it's experience with an owner. Sometimes it's experience with a site. Sometimes, it's the type of work. But when we make that plan, we're trying to lay all that out. And the key to getting that plan to work is to be able to stay on time, stay like ahead of the chains. If you're using like a football analogy, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Stay ahead.
How do we do that? So how do we get out of the gate the right way?
So much of it is planning. It's just we have to do a really good job internally, helping the field to say, like, okay, we give them a good solid bid, and we give them a good process and a good schedule. Because a lot of times we've promised the schedule before the foreman hit the ground. The PMs have had some involvement. The estimator obviously has involvement. We can have involvement, but they have a schedule. So you have to build them a reasonable schedule, right? Because the first thing is, if I ask you to do 9 months worth of work in 6 months, well, it's probably not going to go well.
Yeah.
So that's number one. And then number two is having that bid be complete so that you know who your vendors are. You know what materials you need. We know the materials are available. You got the long lead items ordered when you need them. You have, you're setting up submittals, everything the office can do so that when the job hits the ground, they're running. Because there's nothing worse than when we get to a job and the team's ready to go and the schedule works out and you hit the ground and then there's a long lead item and you can't get the structures you need. So now we have the crew, we have them on site, we have the equipment on site, we have permission to go. That's the right schedule. something happens and we can't get structures there.
Yeah.
And then, okay, well, now what do we do? Now you start shifting, And the other thing I think that we really have to be intentional, and that's a word we use a lot, that we have to be intentional about, is the PM and the foreman managing the job for Berg.
Mm.
So we far too many times, in an effort to get to build a relationship and to get future work, we agree to change how we're going to do that work to accommodate the owner. And there's one specific job last year that comes to mind where we made it almost impossible for ourselves to do the job by letting them build a building in the middle of where we were trying to work before we were ready. But they wanted the building. We hadn't promised it. It wasn't guaranteed. It wasn't like I had liquidated damages holding me to it. But we were trying to be a good contractor and say, like, okay, we can do that. But the money that was put at risk and the conditions the guys had to work under to work around this just made it ridiculous. Like, we should have never done that. And there's lots of instances where that happens in little pieces. But if you can take a good plan, deliver it to the field, and give them a achievable goal to complete this work with the appropriate amount of equipment, appropriate amount of dollars, the right allocation of people, then our teams can meet that, almost every time. So I think that's the key is the work that it takes to set up arriving on site.
And for our folks in the field, right? So what do they do? Like, how do they contribute to us getting off on the right foot?
Well, it's springtime, and April showers bring May flowers, right? So we're trying to get started, and it's also usually during our most rainy season per se. And so it's really about maximizing your time because you are going to have days that we can't get things done, and so we have to try and be efficient. If everything's there that we need to try and keep installing it as necessary as we can based on the site. And also it's constant feedback and communication, because if something comes up, we've had this conversation, I don't know if it's here on the podcast, but okay, we're a subcontractor to anybody that's building anything. We're also the most difficult subcontractor because if they're building a building, they know how much concrete's going to be poured for the floor. They know how many 2x4s are going to be there. We think we know, but we don't know until we open up the ground. I mean, we have products now to try and help us with this, but still, until you open the ground and actually see what's under there, you don't know what you're going to find. You can make all the assumptions you want to, but that's where all of a sudden you hit an issue where it's too wet, or there's some unsuitable materials, or, the utilities aren't in the location that people assumed that they were. And so finding those issues, trying to resolve them quickly from the field perspective, because a lot of times, a lot of changes that happen are field driven because they figured out a solution, and it can go up the chain theoretically, and then it goes across the chain to the client or the engineer, and then it comes back around this big loop. And so getting that information promptly back from the team members in the field really helps speed up and try and, overcome and offset any challenges that we find.
One of the things that our most successful foremen have in common is they approach each day trying to do the best that they can with that given day, with those conditions. So you might have a perfect plan for what you want to do, on a job, whether it be a landfill job and we're saying we're going to lay intermediate cover today, or it's a site work job and we're going to work on the pad today. But all of a sudden it starts raining and we can't do that. And when we struggle is when you see teams that stumble, and they're like, okay, well, now we can't do that. So sometimes they try and do it anyway, and it isn't real productive, and you can end up with a worse mess than if you had done nothing. And other times they stumble and they say, like, okay, well, we can't do that, and they're trying to figure out what to do, and they don't have a solid plan. But when our teams succeed the most, they almost go into any day where weather could be questionable with two plans. Like, what happens if it's sunny, and what happens if it's not? And they're always going to run with the plan of if it's sunny. So Gary Rambo always said, John Haynes said, never plan for rain, right? Always plan for it to be sunny and shining. And that's true, except Gary always had a plan for what happened if it rained, and that's how the best of the foremen for any company in this industry, and probably in anything, but especially for this industry, are. They have a plan for what's going to happen. If we're working on that pad, here's what we're going to do today. But if they're not, they might have some pipe work they can do, or they might have some structures they can put in, Or they might say, we can't do anything. Call the guys before they ever land on that site and say, we'll eat an hour worth of time. But guys, you don't need to come in because we're going to need to work, a little bit longer the rest of the week to play catch up once this weather's gone. So just like coming out of the season out of the gates as fast is important, so is it every day. You know what I mean? Every day approaching that job with knowing I'm trying to get to a point and understanding what the point is and setting realistic stretch goals. You know what I mean? Like a realistic goal for any activity we're doing that is achievable, but not necessarily easy. You know what I mean? It isn't supposed to be easy if you're approaching a job and there's, you say, I'm going to put in 100 foot of pipe today when you should put 200. Well, you put the 100 in, but you're not going to get where you need to be schedule wise. You need to understand what's possible and what you can achieve and what your team can do, and then do that. And in doing that, we all succeed and we move forward, and then the schedule starts to work. And the more that everyone can work together, the more comfortable everybody is, because you never feel good when you're behind the eight ball. Whether it doesn't matter if you're the project manager and the estimator or if you're the laborer. None of us like to be behind the eight ball. You know what I mean? We like to understand what we're trying to do and be able to do it, and being able, given the tools to succeed to do that.
Well, I was just laughing when you said the A and the B plan, because we always joke sometimes you go out to a job site and you're like talking to the foreman and you're like, what are you on? He's like, I'm on double Z plan today. Because, it's like, all right, I got the first plan we're going to plan to do today. That didn't work. Plan B didn't work because somebody's in my way. Plan C was to do this. And, they're joking. They're on their 26th plan for the day to try and get something productive done, because now if it gets that far, you're having a really, really rough day. But the reality is that, you got to keep having things in the back of your brain that, like, hey, you know what? We can jump ahead and do this thing over here this day, because we can't do the thing we were trying to do, as long as you're not going to have to do double work. But you're always trying to have a couple options, because things change on the fly. That's life in our business. And so you're always trying to have alternate ways of being productive every time you can.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and some of the things, Ford, too, that that really become important in the spring isn't the actual work. One of the really important things is managing your site in terms of buttoning it up, rolling that site in, making sure you have a place for the water to go, making sure you're shielding where you're working from the water. All the things when you see a storm is coming, because it sort of reminds me of Ford the other day, or you were saying about, Christmas comes every year, but people are,
right, yeah.
you can't be surprised, but it gets to be November and you're like, oh my God, how am I going to pay for
Or
this?
if you're every guy, it's December 24th and you realize you got to go get presents.
Yeah. So, but it comes every year, Ford. So just so you know, Christmas
Every
will be
year.
the 25th
It happens
this year.
every year.
But, most of the time we know a rainstorm is coming. So that's another place you can really see successes, is if you manage your site. You still might not be able to work that day, but when you go in the next day, your site is in better shape. I was down at one of our jobs the other day, and it was raining. It wasn't miserable, but it had rained. It was going to rain all day lightly. And so I parked and I walked through, and there was an area that no one could get to because all of our stuff was in the way, and we have a lot of equipment there. And I walked on it. It was fine. It was perfect. That site could have been worked on the next day. Unfortunately, the weather did not stop the concrete, the framers, the window guys, anybody. They all were able to work with their lulls, and they trashed the entire site. So once I got to where they were actually working, it looked like we were having some sort of like a mud bog four-wheel drive contest. It was like I mean, their axles were in the mud. They're dragging mud everywhere. There's water sitting like this isn't, and this soil's a little bit clay. It's like, this is not going to dry out. And then they're going to say like, well, it rained yesterday. Why can't you work today? And because you guys just put us 3 days behind. Like and so that's part of the other thing that you have to fight with, is things are outside of your control. Even if you did everything right and protected the site and set yourself up for success, if somebody else messes it up, because all it really takes is a couple set of tracks through where you want to work that's going to hold that water, and you're going to have to drain it off, and you're going to have to do something that's not going anywhere. So, not to be negative, but that's why it is so hard at this time of year, and why it's so important that we work at it every single day and go in with a solid plan. Because if you come out of April and you feel good about where you are as a foreman, you probably set yourself up to feel good until July. And then you repeat the process, but you repeat it in a very dry season,
Right.
when historically you're not going to have to worry about the rain and it gets easier. And in that scenario, then you worry at the end, and that's how it goes for this industry. You worry in March and April, and you worry in late November and December, for opposite reasons, but the exact same condition. The weather
Right.
turns on you.
This winter, I think you said it earlier, was kind of a funny one, right? We usually rely, or I shouldn't say rely, but we usually expect some form of northeast winter weather, snow, frost, whatever it might be. And that didn't really happen this year. But it didn't mean that we could just carry on as usual, right?
It didn't turn. We didn't turn into Georgia or Arizona. You know, what I mean?
Right.
It didn't get hot and dry,
Right.
and we didn't get I would say South Carolina, but we have somebody we know in South Carolina who said it's rained every day since, I don't know, like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
It's a lot of rain.
A lot of rain. Yeah.
But, it's one of those things, just because it's not freezing, like in your head, you always say, oh, the problem is it's cold.
Mm-hmm.
But we can still do a fair amount of work in the cold, especially utility work. There's certain things you can't do. You're not going to pave if it's cold enough. Earthwork can get tricky because it's frost. But it's not actually the snow that's the problem. And so we still got the same soil conditions that impact us, and impacted us worse because the GCs would say, like, oh, you can work. I mean, there's one particular job we're working for the owner, and it was a time sensitive thing. They decided they didn't want to work through the soil conditions. And Dylan had met with him, and Dylan said, well, there's nothing saying that if we come back in May that it's okay. Like, your soil is not great, and you have certain qualifications you put on it, and every time it rains, this is going to happen. So you could wait 4 months and do nothing about the soil and still have a similar problem to what you have today. Or you could just figure out a solution, which we have a few different solutions costing varying things, and go with that solution, and we could move forward now, and then you'd get the project done at the window you want. So that's important for our team as well, is for the project managers to be really good communicators with the owners, and then communicate back, not down, mind you, but back. In other words, to be the communicator, delivering a message to the owner, and then fielding that response, and then delivering that to the field. And the reality is they would have gotten the information from the field. So they're receiving the information from the field, coming up with a plan, delivering it to the owner feeding it back to them, and them feeding it back to the foreman, and then the teams can go. And so it is a fun time of year in terms of we get going, and you see, nice days. It's sunny out today. You get excited because we know that the working season's coming.
Right. Yeah, for sure. The other thing I was thinking about when you were talking about the communication and the scheduling component, how important it is, and especially in that example you just gave with Dylan, right? But like working when we can work, especially when we've got these questionable, sometimes wet conditions, not just for the sake of being there and working, but working when we can work, because I know we've run into it before where schedule delays actually cause overlaps in where we're supposed to be. And that's just as much of a problem as having a big gap in between work. So.
Yeah, well, it's funny, we're not on this, but so extra work, right, on a job site.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody outside of our industry thinks that that's wonderful because it's more revenue on the job. But the reality is, with this scheduling that you have to do, that extra work, while it does create extra revenue opportunities and more hours, it wasn't in the schedule. So you got a 10-month job. You're supposed to be starting and finishing X and X date. And then all of a sudden you get an extra month worth of work. It's wonderful, but as Dan was saying, that crew was already planned to go to the next project. Yeah. And all of a sudden you're a month overlap, and then you're trying to half start the next job and keep that going, and then finishing up this job. And so, the overlapping, I mean, in our industry, nothing ever lines up exactly, right? That's just the nature of the beast. But that extra work thing does not always, it creates as much challenges as it does benefits to everybody involved.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's, the other thing for when you talk about that is the challenges, they always come back to us, and that is true. It doesn't matter if you're the plumber or the electrician or the framer or the site work guy. When there's a problem, an owner is paying you, and so he assumes that you're like working to solve the problem, and you get like lumped in to be part of the problem. And there's a specific job I was thinking about that we started, and I was away on vacation, and one of the owner's reps called me and said, you're already 3 weeks behind. And I was like, I think I went away for 5 days. It was day 2, and we hadn't started the job when I left. So like we weren't there.
You're 3 weeks behind.
I'm unclear how we can possibly
when we started
3 weeks behind. I've only been gone for a day. And so, I was going skiing, and so I was on the lift, and I called Brad, and I was like, Brad, like, did something happen at this job? And he's like, no, why? And I'm like, well, I talked to the owner, and the owner says we're 3 weeks behind. He was like, no, they're 3 weeks behind. They didn't have the demo permit that they needed, and then that was delayed because of a utility, demo permit they didn't have, and like there was all these things that triggered it. But at the end of the day, I was 3 weeks behind, and when I talked to the owner when I got back, he said, so we just got to figure out a way for you to make that up. And I was like, I don't sort of to Ford's point, like we had a schedule, and my schedule didn't change, and then 3 weeks later or 2 weeks later they finally get everything in order, and he's like, okay, so we're going to be ready to go, I need you there. And I was like, I said to the owner, the crew wasn't just sitting and waiting these 5 weeks to go to your job. Like, now something else got moved up. They're doing that. When they get done that, they'll come back to your job. And he was like, well, now you're going to make me 6 weeks behind. And I thought, like, no, you made me 6 weeks behind. Like, you've messed up my schedule for the whole time. Like, my schedule's now impacted the whole way because you weren't ready. But that's not how the owners see it.
The man that writes the checks never has the problem.
They're paying to make the problem go away. So that's another thing as we talk about this getting out and started in the year is be mindful as you're out there, whether you're the laborer on the job or whether you're the foreman on the job. When the owners are around or you're hearing communications, just try and be mindful of what where that's coming from. It doesn't make them right, but there's no reason to argue about it. Like, it's their position. Yeah. And then you just have to, again, communication becomes so important this time of year with allowing each person to do what is their role in the company. And we always say about just do your job, and that's it. Like, the foreman's job is to manage that job and get it to where it needs to be. The project manager's job is to manage the project, manage the owner. And if it gets above that, then Ford or I have to be involved to try and like facilitate calming people down and letting them see the light of what's really going on here. But if each of us do our job, then that's how we get that smooth start, which may or may not be on the right day. Like you said, when does spring start? And whatever Ford said, March 21st.
Is it when the flowers show up?
That's what But, the truth is there's not a start date. It's a season. And so the key now is put ourselves in the best possible spot every day that we can, so that in May and June, it starts to get easier as we ramp up and then turn a corner in July and August.
Yeah. I drive past this car rental place every day, and they got a sign up that says, no winter will last forever and no spring will skip its turn. They put that up right around Groundhog's Day, but I thought that was funny. That's insightful, right? That's deep.
While we talk about spring, do you want to quick, this can be like a public service announcement. Do you want to explain your Groundhog's Day thing? That when people say, like, is it 6 weeks? You want to go over that?
How it's always the same time frame? Yeah. 6 weeks till winter, 6 weeks till spring. Yeah, it's always the same. It's never different. See your shadow, don't see your shadow. It doesn't matter.
I just can't believe that the groundhog isn't what determines when spring starts, Brian.
I know, but apparently there's a lot of folks who think old Punxsutawney Phil over there.
He's got the idea.
He's got the touch. He knows.
I mean, not to completely jump off, but how did groundhogs become that? And the casino thing is like the second, was it Gus, the second most famous? It's like, how did groundhogs become so popular?
The lottery guy.
Yeah.
So it just keeps scratching.
Yeah.
Just keep scratching. So, yeah. Yeah. Talking about growing season, right? How dependent is that for some of our clients? Like, my wife and I get the opportunity to go down to Longwood, and this is like the exciting time of year if you're a visitor, right? So, stuff starts to show up again. So
yeah. Well, I mean, and I think all of us do it, like to some degree. The
days are longer. It's warmer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you just notice things. I was out this weekend. We were going. Soccer never stops, but it started to ramp up full speed again.
Right. Yep.
And I noticed there was like daffodils, which then triggered my mind where going back to where we first lived when we got married, there was this park and it had all daffodils we take pictures of.
Yeah.
I'd say the girls, but it was just Mara because there was no other girls yet. But that always triggers, like you see certain flowers and the earlier flowers and you think like it's spring or, I was sitting in the bleachers and when it wasn't cloudy, all of a sudden it felt like summer. And then the cloud comes in front and it's windy and you're like, it's so cold.
Nope. Still winter.
But that's the Northeast, and that's what our guys are dealing with every single day is, Ford's the one that says, aren't you the one that says it about it this time of year in PA? You have to have every piece of clothing. You have to be ready for everything. Like, winter's at like 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. Spring happens like around 9 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon, and it's summer from like 11 to 11.
Especially if you're in the
1.
field and you have like an extended cab pickup truck or something like that. And like
Yeah.
all of a sudden one day you go to your closet and you're like, oh, there's no sweatshirts left. And you realize all of them are somehow piled up in the back of your car
Your
because
sweatshirts, your
you
jackets,
started the morning that way. And,
heavy,
you know,
heavy socks, whatever.
yeah, exactly. And all of a
gloves,
sudden by middle of the day, you're like, oh my goodness, I
peeling
can't.
off the layers.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, that's something with the people, you know, with our team, as well as all the people out there in the trades that are working, you know, I mean, they're in this every day. I mean, we're having a podcast in a HVAC controlled office talking about what it's like to work in spring.
The hardships of being
hardships
outside.
of being outside. And I mean, and these guys know it, you know what I mean? They live it every day. And it's, I know when I'm talking on a Monday morning call and I say like, hey, we have weather coming this week, you know, be mindful. Let's be productive, but not try and, you know, put ourselves in a bad spot. And every one of those guys listening knows that. I mean, I'll be out on the site a couple times, but the reality is I'm not going to be impacted by the weather. You know, like I'm not the one that's muddy. I'm not the one that's soaked. I'm not the one that's freezing.
Right.
And regardless of time of year, we always say like Thanksgiving is not the time we should give thanks. You know, I appreciate it because we're going to ask the guys to do what they do every single year for the next 2 months. You know what I mean? Deal with the weather and get us to a point where we can be successful as a team by May.
Yeah, get the horse out of the gate.
That's it. Cleanly.
Yeah. Well, clean being.
It's going to be a little muddy.
Yeah, it's going to be muddy.
And make sure you get the mud off the tracks before you get out on the road if you're off the track.
And sweep the trailers. Yeah. All right. That's a good place to wrap it up. Spring's coming. It won't skip its turn, though. Thanks for joining us today, folks. We hope you have a good one.